Kevin, good evening. Thank you so much for joining me tonight and welcome to the All Around Adventure podcast.
Josh, thanks so much for having me on. Appreciate it.
Yeah, well, I know you've been traveling quite a bit, so I'm glad we were able to line this up. So, kind of sort of fill us in on some of your current projects, because like when you and I first connected, you were actually like on the road heading home to the Carolinas from, I think, out west, weren't you?
Gosh, I don't even recall when we connected. It could have been from out west. It could have been from up north. The past month and a half, I would say I've been in Utah, Florida. I've been in Connecticut. I've been pretty much in many points in between, promoting my book and teaching courses and just doing a lot of media work lately. So it could have been any number of those places. Your guess is as good as mine where I was exactly at that moment in time.
So you mentioned Connecticut in there, and if I recall, you are actually from New England. Is Connecticut your home state?
That is where I was born and raised. I lived there for 40 years before moving out to Utah and then stayed in Utah for a couple of years. And I've been in North Carolina since 2022.
What did you like best about growing up in New England? Now, the interesting thing about New England to me is one of the things that's on my bucket list, Kevin, is to go to all 40 state, or excuse me, all 50 states. So far, I've done 42, but all six of those New England states east of New York, I actually have not been to yet. So they're uncharted territory for me. So I'm going to have to ask a little bit about them. What was it like growing up in New England, especially? I'm sure that this had a lot to do with you kind of sort of setting the framework for your journey as a survival expert and outdoorsman.
Oh my gosh. New England for me, it's all about the four seasons, right? I mean, we have incredibly rich history in New England where there are towns in New England that predate the birth of the nation. I mean, it's very, very old architecture up there and very old forest, if you can still find it. But the beauty that I love of New England are the four different seasons that we have up there. I mean, I grew up fishing and hiking and I eventually got into skiing and learning to explore the mountains up in New Hampshire and Vermont and up in Maine. I mean, you have the beauty of all four seasons and the landscape really does transform. I mean, it looks like a completely different environment because it is, and no better place to see that than Mount Washington, right? Like when you look at the trails in the summertime, they're gorgeous. You've got, beautiful gushing, rivers and, you've got just amazing, fauna that you can see and flora. But then in the wintertime, it looks like a frozen planet. It looks like you're on the surface of the moon when you get above tree line. So yeah, I would definitely say that the four seasons are the star of New England. That really, when I think about, what makes me smile about New England, it's just the change of the weather and the way that, you can live in one state and experience it four different ways each year.
I mean, when it comes to being in the outdoors, there's a lot of different activities that you could take on. And I imagine in New England, especially, I mean, if you got all four seasons, you can do like long distance hiking. The Appalachian Trail, of course, runs through a good part of it. I'm sure there's good skiing and everything like that. So what was it about wilderness survival that actually kind of stood out to you that actually kind of made you want to focus in on that maybe more so than like other outdoor activities that you could have done?
Well, I mean, the wilderness survival interest came at a young age from my father. And I just grew up at the perfect time where, Rambo was, the movie and Goonies was a movie and MacGyver was on television. And then there was G.I. Joe and He-Man. And I mean, all these awesome TV shows and movies, and then pair that with my dad's experience in the Philippines and then having the opportunity to go hiking and fishing and doing all these things. I mean, it just made sense that I would get into first, building little kits when I was a little kid, and then eventually doing more in the great outdoors and going further and being a little bit more bold and daring, and eventually formalizing the outdoor education at the different schools around New England before settling in at the Wilderness Learning Center in upstate New York. So, I mean, it just was a perfect blend, the perfect storm, if you will, of timing and interests and, a location to do it all. And don't get me wrong, like there's absolutely, in my background, an interest in survival, but survival is what you do when the activities that you're partaking in go wrong, right? I mean, I was into canoe camping and kayaking and backpacking. And, I just looked at it as like, hey, I'm just going to be a woodsman. And, the survival skills were there, but I really still to this day, I pride myself on more of the bushcraft side of what I do and, identifying edible medicinal plants and, using resources, properly and then drawing on knowledge of, the library and, all the stuff that I've done over the years. So, like I said, it was just the perfect timing and location and all the factors coming together all at once.
So you were there for the first several decades of your life, and then you found your way out west. What prompted that change, especially after you were living in New England for so long, and then and obviously it sounds like such an amazing place as you described. What prompted the move?
Well, again, it was another combination of things. 2020, as we all remember, was COVID, right? The pandemic. And, in 2020, I was in year number 14 of teaching high school history. And I love teaching. Don't get me wrong. I'm still technically a certified high school history teacher, actually grade 4 through 12, if we want to get really specific. And not to pat myself on the back, but I was good at it. I mean, I taught the AP classes. I had a very high percentage rate of getting kids passing scores on the AP test. I enjoyed what I did, but I became disillusioned with teaching when COVID hit because we were told as teachers, we just have to get the kids online on the computer, have them check in, say, hey, do you need help with anything? The kids always would say, no, I don't, I'm good. And then we would click off, and we only needed to get the kids to sign on for about 5 minutes. And we really didn't have the connection with them. And as a teacher, I really enjoyed working with my students, watching them grow, grading their essays. Eventually, at the end of the year, getting thank you notes from the kids, that you really touched, and they were like, thank you so much for doing what you did. I got into the school of my dreams because of you, like stuff like that. Did not feel that during COVID. And when COVID happened, again, I was very disillusioned with it. And I had an opportunity to join a company called Fieldcraft Survival out west. And I was offered full-time employment, and I was told, hey, why don't you become the survival guy at our company? And I went out there in August of that year. I taught a class, like a trial run class. And after I taught that trial run class, I made the decision that fall, you know what? I'm 14 years in this career, 14 years and 2 or 3 months. I'm like, but I think it's time, because some of the stuff with COVID was still happening, and I had an opportunity to get away from all of that and, try something that everyone was saying for the longest time, like, hey, you should not be teaching. They're like, you should be following this career in the great outdoors. It's more you. And, I said, why not? I'm going to give it a shot.
Well, so obviously your teaching pedigree carries over pretty well to survival instructing, I would imagine too.
Oh, no doubt about it. I mean, setting objectives early on and understanding assessments and understanding, the various ways that people learn. There's no doubt about it that people, when they're in my class, they've said, we can tell you're a teacher. It's not just like I'm yelling at someone or hoping that people are going to, just listen to me, do things, and then just be awed by my coolness. It's like, no, 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 I need you to get to a different level. Don't worry about me. I'm just the messenger of skills and knowledge.
What did the conversation look like with family and friends when you announced that you were making this decision to end your teaching career and move all the way across the country? Because I feel like when you would tell people that you've been in that profession for that many years, you've obviously were doing very well. We're seeing a lot of success in your students. I'm sure like there was probably some perplexity there as to why you would hang it up and pretty much do this shift at this point in your life.
Oh, don't get me wrong. I had a mixture of people who said, you should just really stick it out, another 10 years or so, 11 years or so, you could retire with 25 years in, no problem. And then I had other people saying, you gotta dare, right? You've got to take that leap of faith if you really want to succeed. And, I don't get me wrong, there's parts of me that look back and I say, hey, I wish I stayed with teaching, because at this point I'd have 20 years in, I'd have like another 5 to go, maybe 10. And who knows, maybe I will go back to teaching eventually if I decide this outdoors thing isn't for me. I can always go back. But the conversation at that time was a mixed conversation, with the vast majority being incredibly supportive. I mean, keep in mind, I already had my first book that was out. I had a lot of people that said, you don't belong here. You belong somewhere where you can really, reach a greater audience. And, of course there were people who doubted it and said, it's foolish. But again, it ultimately came down to what I felt like doing. And, I put my heart into everything. And, I succeeded when I was out in Utah and when throughout the entire tenure that I had working at that company.
So making the move out to Utah, I want to say that the environment is vastly different than where you grew up in, because that is really the unique thing about the United States. And I tell this to like all my friends, especially those that like live abroad. I say, if you want anything natural, we got it here. It's like if you want to climb 14,000-foot mountains, we have them. Head to Colorado. If you want beaches, like go to any one of our coasts. If you want to slug it out in the swamps, head to Florida, head to Louisiana, right? Or if you just want to stay wet and cloudy all the time, head to the Pacific Northwest. So just about any sort of like natural phenomenon that one can experience, we have it here in the U.S., right? So what was it like kind of adjusting, I guess, your teaching and your own like survival skill set once you actually kind of started planting roots in an environment, which I would imagine, like I said, that was quite different than that you grew up in and spent so many years in?
Oh yeah, I mean, keep in mind where I really excel. What I tell people I specialize in is the northern forest. Right, that's what I spent the most time in. That's where I cut my teeth, north of the Adirondacks, northern forest. 12 months out of the year, I do well there. Utah is high desert where I was, right? Spanish Fork. So very, very dry. Very little humidity at all, right? I mean, so one thing in the winter, I wasn't as cold as some people were because I was used to that wet cold that just kind of gets into your bones. And they're like, why are you walking around with just a t-shirt on? I'm like, what is it? Like 45, 50 degrees? They're like, it's 20. I'm like, there's no way it's 20. Like that was one factor, right? The cold. The uh, elevation, that definitely got to me because where I was living and where I was working was at about 4,500 to 5,500 feet above sea level. So not quite the mile high city, but when we went into the woods, or I should say into the mountains, it was definitely north of a mile. Sometimes 9,000, sometimes 10,000 feet high up in Utah. And, for the first, I'd say 6 months to 9 months that I lived out there, that was a true acclimatization process where, walking upstairs, you'd feel it. Like you'd feel your heart beating a little bit more. You'd be a little bit more, slow to catch your breath. I mean, elevation, that's one thing. The cold was another. The high heat, it's again a dry heat. And out there in the desert, your primary concern, compared to like the Northeast where, hey, you go get out of the precipitation, you got to get out of the sunlight out there. So that was, a major change was understanding just how hot the sun can get. But, me being me and being interested in edible and medicinal plants, there's really a different landscape out there. Everything is sagebrush. Everything is sagebrush, or it's willow if you can find water, until you get up into the mountains, and then you find like, your poplar trees, or I should say your, the trees that were more like the ones that we had in the Northeast. So it was definitely an adjustment learning that. But that being said, there there are plenty of resources and there's no shortage of places to go where you can just get that field experience. And I often found myself after I would teach for a whole week or I'd have a weekend of training up in the mountains and I had a day off, I was back up in the mountains for my day off because I found it so enjoyable. So yeah, I mean, the the other thing to get used to when you go out to Utah is that unlike the Northeast where everything feels like it's growing in over you and like you feel like there's true canopy, even driving down the roads, out in Utah, everything is open. It feels like a strip mall when you're in the Salt Lake City Valley, and you don't get that enclosure feeling until you get up into the mountains. So there was a little bit of a longing for home, and I would have stayed out in Utah longer if, certain things had happened. But that being said, I enjoyed my time out there, the environment, and, I'm looking forward to getting back out there again in about a month's time to teach another couple classes out there.
Well, I certainly know that feeling because I live in Central Texas now, and of course, a lot of it just big, wide open spaces. It's a
Yeah.
good thing. It's a good thing I'm not agoraphobic. But when I go home to my home state, Michigan, which of course, we felt all four seasons very distinctly, like you did in New England, is just with the deciduous trees, I kind of just miss those so much, and I miss
Yeah.
fall, seeing the leaves, change color in fall. And then the only reason why it's so open where I'm from is because we have a lot of farm fields. Had it not been for the farm
Right.
fields
Right.
there, it'd be all forest. So I certainly know that feeling. So, what was the travel volume like for you once you kind of started? Once you made the move to Utah and you started up with fieldcraft? Because I imagine even though you had just moved out there, you probably weren't always there. You were probably on the go quite a bit, I'd imagine.
I mean, let me put it this way. I got to Utah on a Friday, and the next day, that Saturday, I taught a survival class. So, I mean, it was a constant, I'd say easily 80 hours a week, for or 80 hours per week for the work week. And it was taxing. There's no way around it. I mean, you go from a teacher schedule where, we would get up 6 o'clock in the morning, 5:30 in the morning. I'd leave for work at 6:30, 6:45. I'd get to work by 7, and I'd be home by 3 in the afternoon. Now compare that to what I was doing at Fieldcraft, where I would get to work for 8 or 9 in the morning and sometimes stay until 8 or 9 at night. And then when I was doing the overnight classes, well, now I'm in the field, or if I was on like a filming or a media assignment, I was away from home. So I mean, it was easily 80 plus hours a week. And I was in a relationship when I moved out to Utah with a gal that I was with for 7 years. And I will easily say that Fieldcraft, that crazy work schedule, like that impossible work schedule, drove a wedge, between me and that girl, just because, um, it just was a great departure from what we had in the past. Now, it was every weekend, and I was going from Utah to South Carolina to, anywhere we had an event, up to Idaho, out to the Pacific Northwest. I mean, I was all over. And that was my job though, right? Like I was the training director out there. So it was train, 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 be on the road. And during the week, write blogs and podcasts. And like, it was hectic.
Did you do any trips abroad at all?
I haven't gone abroad since before COVID. Which, I've been getting the travel bug to go abroad. I've been enjoying traveling domestically and doing like these little trips here and there, hunting trips and whatnot. But I'm getting that travel bug to go abroad again. And I just found out that I have all these miles that I've built up on Southwest. So it's like I'm debating whether I go back to Costa Rica because I loved it in Costa Rica. Do I go to Belize? I had a guy reach out to me and say, "Hey, if you ever want to come hunting in Hawaii, let me know." And it's like I have enough miles to get to Hawaii and go on this epic hunt. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do yet, but I did not get a chance to really do a lot of recreational travel when I was full time with Fieldcraft. It just didn't happen.
Is there any particular place abroad that might stand out to you for a recreational trip? Like you did mention a little bit of Central America in there, but
Yeah.
what about like Europe, Africa, Asia, Australia, even any
Yep.
places that stand out to you at all?
Oh yeah. So I still want to get back to Scandinavia. I had traveled to Sweden in 2013, and then I did a solo trip to Norway in 2014, and I just rented a car, brought my camping stuff, and I spent most of the trip like just traveling on these back roads and then dropping my tent and sleeping for the night. I'm sorry, I brought my hammock and sleeping for the night. And I was like, oh, I'm going to do Finland. And I never got a chance to do Finland. So I want to do Finland badly. And I want to do the same thing because over there, it's kind of cool. They have what they call right to access, where you can uh, get over there. And then as long as you camp for like no more than 2 or 3 nights in one place, and as long as you respect the land, they let you camp just about anywhere. And they say it's the right to access. The people own the land. So I would love to do Scandinavia. I would love to get back to Africa and do another hunt over there. In fact, I've got a buddy who wants me to do a hunt, so that's a possibility. And now there's talk potentially of doing a trip over to Asia with some of the guys from Fieldcraft. My buddy John Park, he's like, "Hey, we want to do a trip to Korea, and you would train." And I'm like, "Yeah, but can I also see Korea?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, you can see Korea." So there's a chance to do all of that, and I'm looking forward to it. And I eventually will get to all of them, but one at a time.
All right, right on. One thing place I think you might like is Morocco. I was there a few years ago, and I did a trek in the Atlas Mountain, which was amazing. And then I spent 3 days riding a camel through the Sahara, and no place like that. I'll tell you that much. So that's something
I
I
went
thought was
to
really unique.
I went to Morocco when I was 14 or 15 years old with my
Oh,
dad and my
really?
sister. To this day, it's one of the scariest places I've ever traveled to in the city. Because this is a true story. We're sitting at this like cafe, on the street, and it's my dad and my sister, on one side, me on the other. And there's obviously like the panhandlers coming up to you saying money, money, that type of thing. And this woman reaches out, and she had all sores on her arm from like probably shooting up. And I mean, it was in your face everywhere. But then we looked across the street, and a guy had lost his coin in a telephone booth. And rather than saying, "I lost my coin, let me put in another," he proceeded to rip the phone out of the phone booth and then break all of the glass in the phone booth, including the glass over his head. And I'm sitting there with my dad and my sister, and we're watching this. We're like, "Oh my God, are you seeing this?" And on top of that, like, no police ever showed up. So this guy had like destroyed property, not far from us, no cop response. People were like, "Ah, whatever." It was like no big deal to anyone else. Like, it happens all the time. And then, me being a knife collector, we went into a couple of those like little bazaar shops, and I'm like, "Oh, I'll look at that knife." And the guy's like, "No, no, no, follow me. I'll show you more." So I went with my sister up to this, uh, like the attic of this one of these shops, and I swear we thought we were going to be beheaded. It was just creepy, and on top of it, in Morocco, I know that I got food poisoning or waterborne illness, because when we eventually made our way back across Gibraltar to Spain, I was sick as a dog, and I want to say that it was because of the Moroccan water or food or something. So yeah, don't get me wrong, gorgeous, gorgeous country. Like you said, the Atlas Mountains, and there's no shortage of beautiful architecture and whatnot. But man, I don't have good experiences personally being in Morocco.
It left a bad taste in your mouth. It sounds like, quite literally.
Quite literally, yes, sir.
All right. Well, we'll certainly circle back, I'm sure, to kind of talk a little bit more about like traveling abroad and everything. But I want to kind of get a little bit more into. I mean, obviously, since I have you on this podcast, I kind of have to pick your brain a little bit about some wilderness survival and everything like that. And of course, there's only so much we can cover in a single podcast episode. So maybe
Sure.
we'll try to like sort of narrow it down. Now, when you go out and teach classes, you've been doing this for quite some time, and like you've mentioned, you've been all over the country teaching. What would you say are some kind of like common denominators you've observed among students that when they show up to class, are there like certain skills that you find are either like commonly lacking or knowledge that's unknown? What have you observed so far?
I mean, if we run through like the different topics that are covered, knife skills, people know how to handle a knife like they would in the kitchen, but it doesn't translate when it comes to carving wood, right? And they understand how to hold a knife in various grips, but not all the grips that are necessary. So I'll watch people use a knife, and are they struggle with the way to hold it because they don't have the grip strength or the dexterity yet. But then by the end of the class, after running them through a drill where we make tri sticks or whatever, they pick that up. So knife skills, I would say people don't understand how to use a knife on wood. They're used to cutting softer medium like vegetables or fruit. When it comes to fire, people have an idea in theory of how to make fire off the land, but without natural tinder, they struggle. And it could be for any number of reasons, right? They jump too quickly in the fire progression, going from tinder to, say, like small fuel, and they forget kindling along the way. So many times I'll tell students, like, "Hey, get 12 of each type of fuel, right? 12 pieces of kindling, 12 pieces of small, medium, large fuel, and so forth. Once you have 12, right, you can adjust it from there." when it comes to water, not many people realize how much water you need, and they just don't drink. And that's really frustrating because I'll say to everyone, I'll be like, all right, guys, who here has actually gone to the bathroom today? And it's like 3 in the afternoon. And 3 o'clock is when usually people, they, start trailing off. And if you're not peeing by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it's like you have not been drinking enough water. And, we're not going and doing, a burn down session where we're doing like burpees and push-ups and whatnot. But that being said, just sweating in the environment, you need to rehydrate. And then looking at shelters, people don't understand how to tie a proper ridge line where it needs to be super tight to prevent that tarp, if you're laying the tarp over the top of the ridge line, from sagging, so they get that accordion effect. Or they're like, well, this is how I've always tied up my hammock, or this is how I've always tied up my shelter. And then you say, well, it always works until it doesn't. Can I show you how to improve it? And then they realize, wow, there are these little tips and tricks that are best practices that should be adopted. Land navigation, right? Land navigation is something that I've been teaching a lot of lately. And I find that people, they understand basics of navigation, and they've done things like they know to keep certain objects on their right hand side, but they don't know that that's a concept called hand railing. And they don't know that, you're going to walk this way until you hit the river. They don't know to call that a catch feature, or, a backstop, that type of thing. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. When I get into marksmanship, people have an idea of, man, I can shoot. I'm really, really good. I can hit the target. It's like, okay, but are you accurate? Are you precise? And do you know the difference between precision and accuracy? And then can you apply that across different platforms? I mean, I could go on and on and on. I've seen a lot lately just because I've been, ramping up the training. But generally, one thing I will say on a positive note is that when people come to classes, the vast majority of people in those classes are open to learning. And I say that because they're willing to pay for training, as opposed to people who are YouTube trainers or podcast trainers, or, just book trainers, where the level of their investment is just in their bill to Spectrum or whatever internet service that they have. When someone comes to the class and they've invested, they are going to be there hopefully to learn. Now, every once in a while, you get someone who wants to put on a show, but it becomes very obvious when someone is trying to show off, that that's what they're there for. And many times the other students will self-correct the class, and I don't even need to say anything. They're going to be like, can we let him talk? And I'm like, guys, like, I want to hear from all of you. I appreciate you, bringing the attention back here because you came here for me. But yeah, I would say that there are a lot of commonalities that I find all across the country. Probably the most persistent, though, is that people who show up to class want to learn, and I always say they show up as strangers and they leave as friends, because they get welcomed into a community that's just filled with awesome learners.
Do you think in this day and age there might be an over reliance on technology? Because sometimes I wonder, like you talk about land navigation, I'm wondering, like, when people show up to land navigation, how many of them, are relying on a GPS and probably have never seen like a topo map or use like a road atlas or anything like that. So, but then of course, like if we have, like, let's say a grid down scenario or a solar flare or something crazy like that, and next thing you know, we're not getting any more satellite coverage. All of a sudden, electronics are fried. Do you think that a lot of people will be able to revert back to the old ways of doing things? What are your thoughts on that?
So I think if people have been trained, whenever there's a power outage, it just becomes camping indoors. I don't think you have to worry when you have that training. I don't think you have to worry so much when you deliberately look for these challenges. And there are people, when they come to class, they like gadgets, right? And don't get me wrong, I like a gadget. And we could argue and we could debate, like, what is technology, right? Is me having a Swiss Army knife in my pocket too much technology versus me going out and finding, a piece of chert and making a cutting edge? There's a certain acceptable amount of technology. I mean, would I want to have all natural clothes that I made from the land? Probably not. They're not as comfortable as modern manufactured clothes. I think what happens is there's a balance that's struck at some point when you go out into the woods and you learn about the modern skills, right? I teach a class called Modern Survival Skills, using the best technology, the best tools for the job. But then I think there's also the balance point that happens when I show students like, okay, you brought 50 feet of 550 paracord, but let me show you how to make cordage and watch how strong this is. And when I make milkweed cordage, or when I make cordage off of, willow, and I say, try breaking this. And the students can't break it. They're like, oh my gosh. And I'm like, yeah, and that was quick cordage. That was just twist overlay, or that was, plated cordage. I said, and that it took very little prep, but let me dry out the cordage and show you just how strong I can get it. And they're like, whoa, so I don't have to use my 550 cord? I'm like, no, you get to save it. And it's more rewarding knowing that like you can go into the wilderness, and with the skills in your head and understanding of basic concepts, you can come up with solutions from off the landscape. And that's the essence of bushcraft, right? Using the natural world to address problems, and to go about your life, versus constantly reaching into the bag of tricks and, the goodie bag of all the tech that's out there. And like I said, there are times when it's cool to use primitive tech or bushcraft. But there are times where it's like, you're foolish not to use modern tech. Like if you're out in dangerous game country and a cat or a bear is staring you down, break out that pepper spray, right? Break out that bear spray as opposed to just throwing rocks. I think one might be more effective. And if you happen to have a firearm on you, well, and you are pressed into using it, I think you'll be appreciative that, that 45-70 or that 12 gauge packs a little bit more, oomph than a slung rock, So I think when people train, the comfort level goes way up, the confidence level goes way up, and it's a true confidence as opposed to a false sense of security just because they have tech.
Oh, that's a good dichotomy there. And I will say it's empowering when you kind of learn like some of the older ways and you're able to actually utilize them effectively. A few years back, I actually lived in the UK. I went to grad school there, and a buddy of mine came out to visit me, and we did a 5-day overland trek through the Scottish lowlands, which was absolutely amazing. But we did the whole trip overland just using topo map and compass. And because, well, neither one of us could get GPS signal out that way because we had no cell reception whatsoever at all. So it was pretty much the only way out was through, really. But yeah, it was just kind of empowering because we went to every single one of the places that we wanted to get to. We had like designated spots we wanted to go and stay at each night. And we made it to every single one of them just using map and compass. And, sometimes I feel like, and this is where I kind of want to ask you about survival mindset as well, because I feel like when you're out there, you're tired, you're hungry, you're thirsty, you're frustrated. It's easy to just really want to just go for convenience. And if convenience like isn't there and you have to like read a map and try to figure it out to make sure you know where you're going, if you're frustrated and you're angry, you could totally throw off your trajectory. You could get lost, and that just makes the situation even worse. So, how do you go about teaching a survival mindset to your students? And do you have any advice for our listeners and viewers that maybe they could start working on and thinking about right now?
Oh my gosh. So survival mindset, I've had to whittle it back down in my classes to the point where, I go over some very basics, and I even have an audio file that I sent to students before the class because I could talk on that for hours and hours and hours about various concepts that have been true over the years, right? The idea of, in life, you either choose strength or you choose weakness. There is no in between. And if you want to get frustrated, you're being really weak right now. Like you're letting your emotions get the best of you. Be stronger than that. So just being black and white, right? Being, very, very firm in that stance where it's like, stop being weak. like there. And the other thing is, you either bring praise or you bring shame upon yourself. So it's like, is what you're doing praiseworthy or is it shameful? Like if you take your friction fireboard, like Tom Hanks in Castaway, he breaks the friction fireboard, he cuts his hand, I'm sorry, breaks his spindle, his plow, he cuts his hand, he grabs a friction fireboard, he throws it, he's being shameful, he's screaming, and then suddenly has that moment of clarity, right? And he gets the fire going. He has that big celebration. Well, guess what? You should be proud, right, of getting a fire going. So, I mean, I think being very, very firm in those statements, either strength or weakness or pride or shame, that will help you make the right decision. From there, it becomes like, for survival mindset, you have to build victories, little victories, and they're built incrementally. So you may not have complete control over your scenario, but you have to stop and take inventory of what you do have control over. Um, in that book, Man's Search for Meaning, the author talks about how even when he was incarcerated in the Holocaust camps, one thing that the guards did not have control over were his emotions. So even though they tried to break him and they tried to belittle him and dehumanize him, he still had control over his emotions, his thought. And that's so powerful, right? So when I talk to students, I do talk about positive mental attitude. I do talk about, little victories. I do talk about the idea, like I said, of, shame or pride or strength or weakness. I talk about, addressing what is possible and probable and, understanding that what you do in life involves a certain amount of risk. But I mean, we could go for hours and hours and hours on any one of those topics. Like, do you volunteer yourself to be a victim? Right? In Filipino martial arts, my background there, we would always say, there are no victims, there are only volunteers. And when someone decides to go outside their house, saying, "Hey, I'm not going to wear a jacket because I'm going to go to my car and I'm going to go from my car to the office, and it's only a 20-foot walk. I'm not bringing a jacket or proper shoes." You're volunteering yourself to be the victim of your own circumstances because you didn't want to be prepared, right? Or when you let yourself get to a point, and I have no shame for calling out people who let themselves get too overweight, right? A pound or two overweight, right? A little bit overweight, hey, it happens. But if you're at that morbidly obese point, shame on you. Like, you need to be able to carry yourself. Would you be able to save my life if I were to go down, and would you be able to drag me? You owe it to your fellow man, to your loved ones, to be in the best shape of your life. So again, are you victimizing yourself, right? Are you deliberately making choices where you're choosing weakness? I mean, it all comes back to that weakness and strength. So, I mean, the mindset thing, it's funny when the students start picking up on this and they start saying things to one another, like, I'll get someone who will give up and they'll be like, "Is that the strong thing to do? Are you being weak right now?" Right? And then after the class, when they talk about like, "Oh yeah, we're gonna go out for food. I've earned a cheesecake," right? I always say that I've earned cheesecake, and they're like, "Isn't that weakness?" I'm like, "It is if I eat it all the time. A little bit here and there, it's a reward." So I guess at that point, we're like arguing semantics and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, the survival psychology is a section of most books that people throw out. Like they're like, "Oh, let me just get to the cool stuff." Probably the most important thing is that willpower. Um, and yet people don't spend the time to develop those skills. And you don't need to go in the wilderness to develop them. I mean, you could develop them just by waking up and putting lines on a calendar saying, "Hey, for 20 days, I'm going to do 100 push-ups for 20 days," right? And then suddenly they can say after 20 days, how many did they do, right? But people will be like, "Oh, I'm not doing that." It's like, you don't have the willingness to do it. You could do it, even if you did it over 12 hours of being awake, but you chose not to. So it's like every single day, life is a series of choices, and I hope that my students make the right ones.
You just made me think of something when you brought up Viktor Frankl and A Man's Search for Meaning. I remember there was a passage in that book where he was talking about when he was in the concentration camp and then the holidays rolled around, there was an alarming number of deaths that took place because I think a lot of people just lost hope. They lost, any hope of escaping because the holidays were rolled around and they were incarcerated. And so obviously hope is a very powerful factor and everything like that. So, but what I'm kind of curious to ask you, since we're kind of talking about like survival psychology here, can hope be taught, or is it something that people just have or they don't have? What are your thoughts on this?
So there's an author, and his name is Lawrence Gonzalez, and Lawrence Gonzalez wrote a book called Deep Survival. And he said that there is power in prayer, right? And what is prayer? It's ultimately hope, right? Now, we definitely should not rely solely on hope, right? Another expression that my colleagues in Filipino martial arts and SIOC like to say is hope is not a plan, and it's true. Now, that being said, hope is kind of like the sprinkles on top, right? It can get you through a lot. I know plenty of people that still carry photos in their wallets, even though we have a computer that has capability of holding thousands of photos. Um, People still keep photos in their wallets, or women that will keep photos in a locket. And it's the idea that that's what's reminding them of what they're getting back to or what they're fighting for. And on a different level, why do people wear crucifixes around their necks, right? Like they're living and hopefully serving the Lord, right? They're doing things for the hope that one day they make it to heaven. So I think it's very powerful. I think it's absolutely essential. I think people who just rely on hope might want to pick up some skills and some equipment too. Um, but I do know that another line from Man's Search for Meaning is, he said, if I can understand the why, I can endure any how. And I think that is such a powerful expression, because it's like, all right, let's get back to that push-up thing. Someday you want to be able to, pick up your kid, right? Or you someday, you want to hike to the top of a mountain, but you know that you've got to lighten your pack, you've got to lighten your load. Well, one of the best ways to lighten your load is to lighten yourself. Get stronger, but get lighter and leaner and stronger. So if you can understand the why, you can endure any how, and I think that's so important, is that you never lose sight of why you're doing things and who you're doing them for, right? And I think that gets back to that whole idea of hope.
So that's a lot of the skills and the mindset when it comes to survival. But let's talk about the juicy stuff now and talk about gear. So obviously you are a blade connoisseur, like you mentioned. You kind of opened up with that. So obviously a good blade, I'm going to just go on a limb and say, is definitely one you would recommend. But what else? What else do you think that, like, if people want to start looking into sort of building out their survival arsenal, what should we look into, sir?
So, I mean, I would start with everyday carry. I would start with things that you're going to use frequently and you're going to have them on you at all times, right? Or they're going to be nearby within arm's reach at almost all times. So you think about it, like that should be good fire starters. Now, I mean, on my Swiss Army knife, I always have a good ferro rod with me, because a good ferro rod, it's not only going to start fires, but I can use it to signal and I can use it as a quick light. But then I also carry a good, Bic lighter with me with a sleeve over it that makes it water resistant. I carry fire with me every single day without fail. Even when I fly on an airplane, I always have at least two lighters on me. They will confiscate your ferro rods. I don't know how they know what a ferro rod is. It's TSA, right? But that's only in your carry-on bag. They won't confiscate it in your check bag. But I do recommend fire every single day. Cordage is another one. I always carry a small length of cordage with me. A flashlight probably gets used more than anything else in my everyday carry, a small little flashlight. And depending on the season, if I have more darkness in the day, I might go with a flashlight that has more throw and more light and a longer burn time than just my little flashlight that I use for mostly here in the summer when it gets shorter nights and longer days. Aside from that, med, right? Like, have a tourniquet, understand how to use tourniquets, because when we get into car accidents, we tend to brace against whatever's in front of us. We push off the floorboard or the A pillar in the car. So that being said, like, you should have some means of stopping blood flow to your extremities. Tourniquets do save lives. Clearly at some point, you should carry a firearm. If you are the defensive mindset, and you should know how to train with that firearm. And training with a firearm isn't just turning money into noise. It's actually looking at a target, keeping track of, what is your score? Like, are you scoring it? Understanding what range can you score certain qualifications at, and what speed can you do that, right? So distance and speed and accuracy on target. after that, like the sky is the limit with survival gear, right? I mean, have a way to start fire, never leave your house and without clothes that you can spend the night in. You know, if you carry a backpack, throw an extra jacket in there, maybe a couple extra pairs of socks, even if they're like little ankle socks, keep your toes dry and the bottom of your feet dry. And, you know, you can go many, many miles with dry feet. Some good emergency food, whether your preference is like, you know, lightly salted like cashews because they have high fat content, or you know, just a whole bunch of Cliff Bars. I mean, I would recommend carrying food on you. And by far, like one of the greatest inventions ever are the Grail water filters, because those things will treat just about any water aside from salt water anywhere on the face of the earth. And I mean, I've been using them now for about 3 or 4 years, and I am convinced that they have like a little magic gremlin in them that takes away all the bad stuff. Because I mean, not knock on wood, I've never been sick when I've pumped water with a Grail.
Yeah, I can attest to how good a Grail bottle works. A few years ago, I through hiked across the entire state of Michigan, and in the Upper Peninsula, there's a lot of water sources where there's a lot of deadfall. So it's just so dense and thick with just basically all of the stuff coming off of the deadfall. And even still, it's just you got like this dark bit of water that you fill the bottle with, and then it's just fresh and clean when you push it through. So yeah, those things are amazing. Now, one thing I also want to ask you, you've had the chance to partner with and collaborate with a lot of different brands out there, knife brands, and those that make a lot of good survival gear. And I know some of your followers would be interested in knowing this, and I'm sure a lot of mine as well. I mean, and so how do you actually go about partnering with different brands out there? And do you have any principles that maybe won't necessarily have to apply just to the survival space, but maybe like for anyone, if they want to find brands and partnerships and do outreach in their own niches? Any suggestions there?
So I would say you're not going to make long-term relationships with companies that you don't share the same common worldview with. That's absolutely critical. You have to be on the same page with certain aspects of life. And you know, there are some brands that I've been very lucky to work with, like Winkler Knives. I mean, I look at Winkler Knives and I think about all the men and women that Winkler Knives have been able to equip that have fought in the global war on terror, and some pretty elite units. And then I think about, you know, the reputation that that company has had, and you know, the legacy that that company has had. And then for them to say, hey, we'll work on a project where we're going to attach both of our names together on it. Well, that didn't just happen overnight. That was the result of many deeds before me from, you know, people from SIOC, and many deeds of people before me from the knife industry, you know, that said, hey, you should talk to Kev, and, you know, hey, give him a shot. And things happen incrementally. Like you can't just go up to a company and say, hey, let's do this. Now there are companies out there and there are people out there too, because it goes both ways, that for enough money they're going to partner with anyone. And I think that's pretty sad, um, because if you're only interested in money, there will never be enough money for you. And I tend to partner with brands that I see building a legacy with, where you know, it's not just about, you know, making a few dollars, right? I do have to keep the lights on. You know, I'm a sole proprietor now. I'm no longer employed by anyone, so I do need to make money. But you know, if I was only concerned with making money, I wouldn't have brands that would also say, hey, we're going to do a special run of this and we're going to donate a portion of it to your charity fund, right? Helping underprivileged kids. So I think it's really important that whatever brand you get in with, number one, they have the same common worldview as you. Number two, they also understand, you know, your goals, and you need to understand theirs. Um, because like I said, if they just want to throw a whole bunch of money at you, I mean, you can see people online that will hawk any product as long as they're getting paid, right? And you can tell like they're like the knife a week person, right? Oh, look at this knife. How cool is this one? The next week, look at this one. How's that one? Like, look at the companies that have been working with the same people for years. Those are usually very genuine relationships, and it's because those people are on the same page in terms of like their thoughts about how they want to leave this world. Um, you know, another bit of advice I would have for people is don't be afraid to approach companies. You know, I went through various phases in my outdoor education career. I started teaching outdoor survival skills professionally in 2007. And, in 2009, I started writing magazine articles. So I'm going on like now year 16 of writing magazine articles. And as a writer, I needed to get, access to product and to experiences. And I've never been shy asking for product, being like, hey, I'm writing this article. This is the reach it's going to have. Are you interested in working with me? And if so, like, what do you need from me? And what can I do for you? Like that type of thing. And I was always impressed at the number of companies that would say, yeah, let's work with you. And then I would have people say, well, aren't you afraid they're going to say no? I'd be like, they say no, they say no, right? Like that's the worst that they could do, right? But the best that they could do is say yes. And now I have an opportunity to really shine. So I always tell people like whether you're designing product or you're looking to collaborate with someone, just be very straightforward and be very honest because it will come out in the end. And the other thing is people pick up on when someone is very disingenuous, and I think when people see the products that I push and they're like, he carries that, right? Like the funniest thing is when I'm at a trade show and someone's like, do you have, your Swiss Army knife pouch on you that you always talk about? I'm like, of course I do, right front pocket. They're like, you really do carry that everywhere. I'm like, why would I lie to you guys? Like so I just say like find companies that are on the same page as you, that are honest, that are consistent. I mean, the list goes on and on and on for working with companies, but I would just tell people don't be afraid to ask. Because you'll find that many of these companies, even though they have these incredible legacies, like Daniel Winkler, like I said, world class, world famous knife maker in the Knife Maker Hall of Fame. I've seen him at his store in North Carolina get approached by a random person and he'll talk to them for 30 minutes. Many of these people want to share what they're passionate about. So don't be afraid to ask them. So I don't know. I feel like I kind of did the Donald Trump, weave, but I ultimately got back to where I wanted to be on that one.
Well, of course, just starting out, and again, in whatever niche someone would go in for, like that's just really what it boils down to. Is you actually do have to ask because no one's not going to know who you are right away if you're just starting. So you actually do have to ask, and because like that's what I answer to a lot of people. A lot of people ask me like, "Oh, well, how did you get like Jack Carr on your podcast? How did you get EJ Snyder on your podcast?" Like men like them, they have like hundreds of thousands of followers, significantly larger audiences than mine. It's like, so like they wondered like what, I guess, how could someone like me with such a smaller following in comparison actually get them to want to come on my show, right? So I'm like, well, first of all, I asked. I mean, that's the first thing. You just got to be not to be afraid to ask. But I find that for me, and maybe you can kind of attest to this as well. It's all about trying to create win-wins. Too. It's just like, yes, maybe my following isn't as large, but I do have a loyal following. And I did see you have like a book or a product or a new course or some other service that you're launching. Let me talk about it on my platform. And one thing I'd like to think that I'm pretty good at, and again, maybe you can kind of attest to this as well, being a kind of a podcast yourself, is I like to think that I'm very good at asking like very unique questions and kind of getting down into some rabbit holes that maybe a lot of other podcasters don't do. I've gotten that kind of feedback quite a bit. So I hope you've been feeling the same way. So I guess like kind of what are your thoughts on that front? Because I mean, it seems like the fear of rejection is kind of a weird one to me personally, because it's like we used to be afraid of like freaking saber-toothed tigers and crazy stuff like out in the wild. Now we're afraid of like, just being told no. So what are your thoughts on, I guess, fear and everything like that too? I guess now that we're kind of just blending that in with our earlier talks on survival.
I mean, we tend to fear the unknown. That's something that is a common trait, right? Like among civilizations, they say what like the common fears for people are like loud noises, right? Loud noises and what was the other one? There's two. But I think a lot of people will say that, oh, I'm afraid of death. And it's like, well, guess what? It's happened to people before us and it's going to happen to people after us. There's nothing we can do about it. It's going to happen. Don't fear it. Like it'll happen when it happens. Like me personally, I'm not a big fan of the sensation of falling, right? And there was a time where I tried like rock climbing and ice climbing. To this day, I will not skydive. Not interested in skydiving, but um, the thing is that like, what do you fear and why? Like getting out to the great outdoors, people will say, well, I fear that I'm going to be attacked by a bear. And it's like, okay, let's talk about that fear of being attacked by a bear. Kodiak Island has the highest population of bears per capita, right? Like it's known for having massive bears. And even though it has that high of a population, very low number of bear attacks on people. And if there were that many bear attacks, it would be renamed Bear Island, not Kodiak Island, right? Or Bear Attack Island. So I think when people fear, it's because they just don't know. So the best way to learn is to, or I should say, to get over your fear is to learn about your fear. Like, what exactly do you fear and why? Um, what I encounter in the great outdoors is I find that people are afraid of sounds at night, right? Like, well, what was that? What was that? Right? They don't like the sensation of things crawling on them, and it's like, okay, well, what could be crawling on you, and what harm could it really do? And if you tuck your sleeves and your shirt in, and you wear a bug net over your face, and you have gloves, like, yeah, let things crawl on you. They can't bite through you, you know. So I think in terms of fear, um, people just need to address it. And the best way to address it is to learn about it. Just find out, what it is that you're afraid of and find out ways that you can face it. Because at some point you do have to face your fear. Um, if you don't like sharks, well, there, there are ways of seeing sharks in an aquarium. And then maybe if you are saying, okay, I'm okay with that, well, maybe you go and you do, a snorkeling trip where the sharks are going to stay lower in the water, but you can look down and see them. And then maybe eventually you'll get to the point where, you do something like I did years ago, where they bring down this bait bucket and they feed the sharks in front of you, and these sharks are swimming everywhere. And they're basically like, hold your hands like this, and if you tip over when you're scuba diving, like don't try to catch yourself, because when you do this the sharks might bite your hand. It's like, I'm keeping my hands as tight as I can under my armpits. So I mean, I think people need to find out about their fears. They need to learn about their fears. They need to address them in little bits until it's no longer a fear.
Right. And we are just barely scratching the surface on this topic, like you mentioned. So, what I would like to encourage our listeners and viewers to do is to go connect with you. And you got a couple of books out there. I have one of them right here, 100 Skills You Need to Survive in the Woods. And you got a second book that just came out this year behind you. So, yeah, tell us a little bit about, just what you kind of have out there on the internet as far as resources are concerned. And we are looking at probably a mid-September release for this episode. So can I also ask, what do you got on the horizon for the rest of 2025 as far as like upcoming courses? Anything on the calendar yet?
Oh yeah. So starting with the book, this book was a long time coming. I mean, I was asked to write it in 2021. I wrote it from August through October, over the course of about 6 weeks. And this book, Beyond the Field, is really it could be a standalone field guide, to a whole bunch of outdoor skills, but it's also a continuation of book number one, because I have a chapter in here that was literally all about, like, hey, I could not include everything I wanted to in book number one, so I've got a chapter on stuff that I've wanted to include and now I can. So you'll find things in here about like backpacking, winter camping, canoeing, marksmanship and camp cooking and off-road driving and all sorts of stuff. The final chapter in the book is my favorite because it's all about how to teach. And I've received a lot of very, very good feedback from friends who and readers who have said that last chapter is worth the price of the book on its own, because, the whole idea of Beyond the Field and the whole idea of taking wilderness skills to the next level is the next generation. The next level is beyond us. And it's cool learning skills for you, but there's another level of satisfaction when you teach it to someone else and you see your skills live on in someone else. I mean, my late mentor, Marty, this guy right here, Marty taught me so much when I was at the Wilderness Learning Center. And, so much of my life now was shaped by lessons that he taught me when I was an instructor up there. So, that's really the the point of the second book. It's how do you develop all these additional skills to make yourself comfortable to teach them. Now, September is coming up. I am going back out to Utah. I'm going to be teaching a land navigation class on the 19th. I'll be teaching a 2-day survival class on the 20th and 21st. And then on the 22nd, I'm flying to Idaho and I'll be teaching a group up there that's trying to stand up a mounted cavalry division. A guy who's a retired Army colonel reached out to me, asked me to come out there to teach some survival skills. So I'm doing that. Other things in September, I mean, I've got a couple things that are cooking. I'm going to be doing some work with my friend's TV show. I've been a regular guest on the Jason the Butcher show. So that show is coming out at the end of September. And I'll be, like I said, a regular guest on that. I'll be filming stuff for season 2 since he just got approved for it. And I'll also most likely be filming some content that will be used to pitch the show that a production company is working on right now for me, which I can't give away the name of it just yet. But when people hear it and they understand the concept, they're gonna be like, yeah, he would do something like that. I'm really excited for that. So September will be filled with some travel, heading back to Connecticut for a bit to enjoy some late season fishing, to see some family and whatnot. But there's going to be a lot of travel, a lot of training still this year, and a lot of land navigation down here in North Carolina. So that's going to be like an every 2 or 3 month type of deal where I'll teach people fairly intensive skills and relative comfort, in this one location that I just secured. So there's a lot of stuff on the horizon, a lot of products, more knife releases, more leather products, and a few guest appearances here and there. So, best way for people to find me is just on my website and look for things under the upcoming events page at kevinestela.com.
And can the books also be purchased at kevinestela.com?
Both books are available on Amazon. If someone wants an autographed copy, they can Venmo me and I'll sign it and I'll drop it in the mail. And that's the best way to get a signed copy if there's, not a book signing in your backyard. I mean, I've already done one in North Carolina. I just got back from one in Florida. I will do one out in Idaho, and I'm working on some other, placements. I might even be out in Texas, just north of San Antonio in the fall. So we'll see. But yeah, people can find my books online. They can reach out to me for knives and leather products and other stuff. And then there are affiliate links that I have to different products on my website as well, holsters and wool survival vests and things like that.
Well, I'll certainly recommend that our guests go check out your books. Not only, like I said before we hit record here, a lot of great information in here, but also I can just tell that, you definitely put a lot of work and a lot of love into this. Everything from the quality of the photographs that are in here to the layout to the aesthetics. It's just, it's very well detailed and very well put together. So hats off to you, sir.
Thank you. Well, from the archaeology background, hopefully 1,000 years from now, if that thing survives, people will look back and be like, man, who is this dude? Right. Yeah. Thank you. That book was really well done. And I really have to give credit to my editor, Sarah, at Page Street. She was the one that really kind of assembled that, made it lay flat, have all the sections color coded and whatnot. And I'll say for mine, the second one, this was self-published. So I didn't have the option of doing the cool stuff on the side. But I laid it out in a very similar format to book 1. So yeah, hopefully people will pick them up and appreciate the read and get something from it and eventually pass it on to the next person.
Well, everyone can find links to them in the show notes for this episode, or if we have viewers that are watching us talk on YouTube, it'll be down in the description below. They can go there and click away and find everything. All right. Well, Kevin, as we start winding down here, I have a few more standard questions that I like to ask all my guests towards the end of the show. And one of the things I like to ask my guests to do is to issue a challenge to our listeners and viewers, because we got to hear some good stories from you today. We also got to get some great information from you today. But as I always say on this podcast, information, inspiration, stories can really only take our listeners and viewers so far. They themselves have to go and follow up with action when they're done listening to us talk. So, with that, what challenge would you issue to our listeners and viewers today for them to go out there and start living a more adventurous life?
So one challenge that I would say is definitely an adventure, and it's not an easy one for people to pick up and do. I would say forgive someone or forgive something. And it's difficult to do this. I for the longest time I would hold on to grudges, and for the longest time I would definitely be someone that had a hard time getting over certain things. But there is definitely power, right? There's strength in forgiveness. Again, coming back to some of the topics from earlier, even people who were incarcerated can forgive the people that incarcerated them. I would say that once you clear up that headspace where you say to yourself, like, I'm not going to let that person live rent free in my head anymore. I'm going to forgive them and just move on. Then you are free to let yourself adventure and do other things. It's so easy to get stuck and think, something was done personally, and maybe it was, but at some point it's like, they're not affecting you right now. It's up to you, right? So I would say it's an unconventional challenge for people, but it's one that I've recently done a few times and I feel great. Like, headspace is awesome. Blood pressure is down just by saying, you know what? I'm good. I forgive that person. There's power in for forgiveness. So I would say that would be my unconventional challenge for listeners. Think of someone that maybe you feel has wronged you and let them know that you forgive them, because then that puts the ball in their court and some interesting things can happen.
Yeah, unconventional and definitely a first for this question, Kevin. But I do appreciate it, though. Great. Now you actually kind of got me going through a Rolodex in my head to see, do I need to forgive anybody? So,
well, I'll tell you, Josh, real quick. So a buddy of mine, John Park, we were out in Utah. He said to me, and he asked me one of the toughest questions. I'm like, damn, John, I don't have an answer for you. I can't really think of an answer. He said, what was a promise that you made that you didn't keep? And I was like, oh my God, that's a great question. I was like, I can't think of one recently that I said, hey, I promise I'll be there, or I'll do this, and I didn't keep it. But eventually I came up with that one where it was like, I only have so much time when I go back to Connecticut, visit families. And I said, oh, I'll be somewhere. And I wasn't able to keep my promise. And it made me feel terrible, So I like those unconventional questions because, I mean, listen, I was thinking also in the back of my head, like, go out and, for one day, try doing everything with your, non-dominant hand, right? Like, that's another great challenge. But sometimes the best challenges get to your mind more than your body. And that forgiveness one is an awesome, awesome challenge.
all right, right on. All right. So what I have next for you is my final three fun questions. At least I like to think that they're fun questions that, again, all of my guests get asked at the end of the show. So you're going to get asked these as well. And the first of these three questions is, what is your favorite place that you've been to so far?
Favorite place I've been to so far, domestically, without a doubt, Alaska. Without a doubt, without a doubt, without a doubt. Internationally, favorite place I've been to so far, most likely Costa Rica. That place is absolutely stunning, and I would go back there in a heartbeat. But then again, Iceland is gorgeous too. So Alaska probably edges out both of those because I've been there the most out of all of them.
All right, awesome. And next to these three questions, what is one thing on your bucket list that you have yet to do?
One thing on my bucket list that I have yet to do, I mean, at some point I need to settle down, have some kids, right? I mean, I'm getting a little long in the tooth, a little bit old for being an old dad, but at the same time, I mean, I know that is something that I would love to do. So, maybe I'll find the special lady out there who's like, hey, let's have some kids and turn them into little, you know, handsome, half Filipino, Polish, half whatever else, explorers, and, do that thing. But I mean, if that's in God's plan, that's in God's plan. So I would say that's definitely on the bucket list.
All right, great. And last of these three questions, and this is a two-parter. What is your favorite animal, and have you seen this animal in the wild?
Oh my God, frogs, by far. Ever since I was a little kid, frogs. And I was just in Florida at Panama City Beach, Florida, and I'm sitting at the pool after my book signing, and I'm hearing frogs everywhere because it's starting to get dusk, right? And they're starting to get like all horny and they're starting to like make noises and whatnot. So I see them jumping in the chlorine water, and I'm like, "Hey, dumbass! Like it's chlorine. Like you absorb everything through your skin. You're a frog." So I started grabbing them and like flicking them onto light poles that were on the outside of the pool, just getting them out of there. So I see frogs everywhere, and I'm fascinated by them. I don't know what it is. Ever since I was a little kid, always loved them. So yeah, by far favorite animal, frogs.
Okay, I will say this. I have a little bit of a love-hate relationship with frogs. So I actually served as a Peace Corps volunteer for a time in West Africa, and so I was in the African Sahel, and during rainy season, we had a torrential downpour one day, and as I was sleeping in my hut at night, there was all these frogs that had gathered by like this nearby puddle just right outside my house, and maybe it was mating season. I'm not sure exactly like how frogs work in that way, but it was so freaking loud, Kevin. They just
Yeah.
would not stop, and I couldn't sleep, and I was like. I was like, I like stormed outside. I'm thinking, all right, enough's enough. Like, I don't know exactly what I could really do, but I was just that mad. And then I shined my headlamp, and there was dozens of them like in this puddle. There were so many. I've never seen that many frogs in one spot before. But yes, to be fair though, frogs are very, interesting amphibians, and also some of them are like super powerful too. Like look at these dart frogs in the Amazon and stuff like that. So I guess I do have to give some frogs credit where credit is due, is that they are very interesting and fascinating, and like some of them could rough me up with minimal effort, but by golly, just keep it down, please. All righty. So, all right. Well, Kevin, that's it, man. That's all the questions that I have for you today. But before we call it a day here, let's just recap one more time where our listeners and viewers can go connect with you, where they can pick up a copy of their books and, see what you got on the horizon as far as instructing in classes go.
Yeah, sure thing. So people can find me on social media, Instagram and Twitter at Estela Wild Ed. You can email me, right? Go to my website. I respond to every single email. That's something I pride myself on. I want to make sure, I never marginalize anyone. Even if it's a ridiculous question, I will email you back. You can train with me. My training is usually posted on my website. I also do all my firearms instruction through Obsidian Spear Group. I was very fortunate to join the ranks of OSG. So I teach defensive shotgun with OSG, and those classes are usually posted on their website. And then you guys will definitely see me on television, this fall and into next year with a couple different projects I'm working on. So I'll be around. Let's put it that way. I'll definitely be around. And clearly, if you guys are down here in Moore County, North Carolina, you may see me at Ed's Gun Shop or, at Bee Hawk Distillery or walking around Southern Pines. So come out and hang out. There's definitely a lot of training to do, a lot of good things to do. And, if you guys happen to see me in the airport, feel free to come up and say hi, because I guarantee I'll have a conversation with you.
All right. And like I mentioned, I'll have everything linked down in the show notes. Or again, if we have viewers watching us talk on YouTube, it'll be down in the description below. All right. Well, Kevin, I want to thank you very much for taking time for joining me tonight. I know you're a busy man and you've been on the go quite a bit, but I really appreciate you taking the time for joining me and sharing your stories and insights with myself and the listeners. It's been great.
Thank you so much, Josh. I appreciate it. And, there's definitely power to the platform. So, keep doing what you're doing. You're doing a great job.
Absolutely. Right on.